All right, welcome back. I am here today with Belle Walker, who is the founder and CEO of Bellevue Consulting, which takes organizations from friction to function, recapturing lost efficiency and engagement for companies across industries. Now the international bestselling author of Generation Innovation and a TEDx speaker, Belle has also built several successful teams for Here Technology, including one responsible for the quality of maps for autonomous vehicles and received 2 patents. Her career began at Google, building a nationwide aerial photography operation and numerous different teams since then. Welcome to the Automated Coach podcast, Belle Walker.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Let's go ahead and dive in. Tell us a little bit about who you serve, what you do, all that good stuff.
Yeah, so I tend to work with organizations that have some sort of friction going on, and they're aware of it because it's the bad kind of friction. We're shrinking those profit margins, eating away at it. It is making them nervous about that upcoming exit or sale that they were dreaming about. It's making them feel like we were growing and now suddenly we're stalled. So that happens at all sorts of different sizes and all sorts of different industries. But the people I really love to work with are the ones that have great people, have a destination in mind that they're trying to get towards, and just need a little bit of grace in the gears to figure out how they move that whole team forward together.
And so, who do you work with in that capacity? Are you brought in by the leadership and you just work with the leadership? Are you working with the whole team? How does that work?
Most often brought in by the leadership, but I do try to work all the way up and down the organization. My experience has been that you have a very different perspective when you're looking from the top down and when you're looking from the bottom up. And if you try to address really any challenge, but especially operational challenges from only one perspective, you're going to miss something big, not just something, but something major. And often it's the COO or the CEO that's really feeling those pain points and has a suspicion that there's an operational hang up that we could be tackling together. But I do also work with leaders within their own organization in a bigger picture, in a larger company. So definitely if it's a traditional pyramidal hierarchy, and we can get into a separate conversation about different operating models and ways of working. But if we've got a pyramid, the person at the top needs to be on board, but they're certainly not the only person I need to be talking to.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. This is a really interesting field. How did you get started with this?
I come from an engineering background. So actually, undergrad was a mechanical engineer, but was spending 40 hours a week at the theater, stage managing. Oh, on that, I know you were thinking about computer science and found other. So I found other passions, but never updated my major. And so was really able to dig in on how to do engineering problem solving, even though the first job I had out of school was building an operation. So realized pretty early on that there's a lot of overlap between engineering problem solving approaches and building operations, building teams, building org structures. And so when I went back to grad school, I went specifically into systems engineering to look at organizations as systems and how can you apply those concepts, approaches, tools. And I didn't hear anyone else talking that way, got very excited about it. It's like, great, I'm going to go be a consultant. That lasted about 2 weeks before I got cold feet. And I think that was a very good call because as enthusiastic as I was, I needed a little more hands-on experience doing the work, building the things. So I did that for most of another decade. Never really lost the passion for engaging with organizations and operations this way. So since 2019, I've been doing this kind of consulting work.
Wow. And in that time, as many of us do, we face a lot of challenges and struggles. What's one challenge that you faced as a business owner and how'd you overcome it?
One of the biggest struggles for me has actually been that I'm an operations person, which you might hear and think, oh, that's perfect. A business is an operation, and it is, but it's an operation that has to go somewhere and do something. And I've never really identified as a visionary. I did a whole TEDx talk about other people being visionaries and me enabling them. And so I would say I'm still in the process of overcoming that struggle because it is a very sort of deep identity element, but having to hold for myself and for my team that broader vision of, yes, we need to be operationally effective and we're trying to take our clients to this higher level. Like having that bigger vision is
Mhm.
actually a pretty big struggle for me that just practice and conscious effort.
Yeah. It's a learned skill.
It really is.
Yeah. As your business has been growing, or perhaps even as your business operates now, how do you get these leads? Where do your leads come from? How do you collect those leads? How do you convert those leads into clients and support them?
A lot of my leads come from referral networking. I happen to be a member of Provisors, which is a large community. There are quite a few options for that. But for me, it's really been about meeting other professionals who serve the same clients, who serve different clients, who are out making a difference in the world as well, making sure that they know and understand what I do, what kind of questions to ask, times to think of me, and then making a really conscious effort on my end to get them the business as well, right? An abundance mentality, givers gain, all of that, which gets the leads. But then you have to convert the sales and support the clients. And for me, qualifying leads is always a bit of an adventure. My natural style tends to be to look for disqualification first, in part because my ideal clients, they do have a sense of where they're trying to go. And with, I would say, the chaos of the last year or two, sometimes that is a very deep awareness that they don't know exactly where they're trying to go and they're not going to for the foreseeable future. But in general, clarity on where you're trying to go and great people who like each other and get along and can have grown up conversations. And if you're missing one of those two pieces, it's not a good use of time or money to engage with me.
Right.
So really digging in and understanding, okay, can I send you to someone else first to address some of those, I don't want to call them bigger pain points, but those first step
Right.
challenges. And then that, in my experience, also helps build some trust because a fair number of folks that come to me are not the right clients for me, and we get them where they need to go. And then for supporting them, engaging in a real discovery and diagnostic phase first. And that came from experience where a client would come to me and say, we've got a process issue. We have an efficiency issue. Can you help us map out and optimize this process? And we'd sign a contract, pay a bunch of money, do a bunch of work, and then realize this is not a process problem. This is an ownership or a roles or an information transfer. And now we have to go fix that problem. And then we can come back and finish the process. But we could have saved a lot of time and energy and money if we had just taken a step back and done some quick checking across the whole big picture first. And so, yeah, so doing discovery diagnostic phase, really breaking out that priority list from there and then tackling the issues.
And throughout that whole process, are you using automation? And if so, how?
Yeah, using a fair amount of automation. Some of it starts as simple as always having Calendly links available so that somebody can schedule with me without me needing to open my own calendar.
Mhm.
I actually do not use note takers during especially my initial discovery calls because there's a lot of vulnerability that needs to come into play. And I think a lot of folks that I work with are still uncomfortable bearing their truths, even with AI listening in.
Right.
I don't know if counts as automation or just pure process, but on the back end, have my own funnels in terms of understanding if you are expressing these pain points, this is where we need to go next. And then throughout the engagements, making sure that I do lean on my LLMs to help polish things. I'm not an LLM first drafter. I do my own first drafts and then love the editing and cleaning support throughout.
And what tools do you use for that?
I have been using ChatGPT, but also experimenting more with Gemini and a little bit with Claude. They definitely all have their own pros and cons.
Yes.
I will say I love me some Designer and PowerPoint, which has gotten a lot stronger recently, but also playing with, which one is it, with Gamma for slide creation. But one of the things that I feel very strongly about is this distinction between automation and AI. a lot of what I end up doing with my clients is looking for opportunities to automate deterministic processes, right?
Mhm.
So ensuring that when thing A happens, thing B is always what happens next. And that is
Right.
not where an LLM is going to,
Right.
traditional AI is going to shine, but having a Zapier connection built in across your tools. Slack with my teams, and we have some few apps built in to connect across calendars, et cetera. So it's that kind of automation.
You mentioned that on the back end, you are clear on what the funnel is and that this leads to this. And that I think that goes back to that idea of making sure that we're addressing the right problem. Even before helping somebody automate, for example, I will talk them through their customer journey because forget about what tools and everything else. What needs to happen? What happens first? What happens second? What happens third? Then let's figure out what pieces of this we can automate. But it's not just, hey, I have this automation tool, use it, because
Right.
that's not the best use of it.
Right. And you have to have that big picture coming in because I'm sure you see this with your clients, one of the big risks is that people take their pre automation process and automate it as is. That's
Mhm.
probably better than not automated, but not necessarily ideal.
Exactly.
Or they tweak something and they forget to tell the upstream team. And so now the upstream team is doing these 5 steps that nobody actually cares about anymore, or they'll
Exactly.
stop doing the 5 steps that it turns out the downstream team really needed.
Yes. It's more of a communication issue, not an automation issue. Yes.
Yes.
Let's transition now into you sharing a little bit about how you help organizations by just sharing 3 tips with us.
Well, I feel like I've given away the first one, which is to ensure you have that big picture before you start automating. There's an incredible risk in local optimization that leads to global failure or pain or inefficiency. And so you can mitigate against that by really having a clear understanding of your customer journey, your service model, your key processes, however you want to
Mm.
call it, knowing what are the high level elements that depend on each other to succeed in your business before you start trying to optimize any given piece. That's definitely tip number one.
And that's the kind of thing that may require and often does require somebody outside your organization to help you think through. Because you have to talk it through. Some things that just seem obvious to you, you need somebody to ask you about. You may not even be thinking of something because everybody must do it this way, but you don't realize that they don't. And so by having somebody ask those questions that's pulling that information out of you, you get a much clearer picture.
For sure. And I often say it's not about just having the skill set, right? It's the skill set and the perspective. I, as an executive, could have used me as a consultant
And
to provide that perspective as well.
what's your next tip?
My next tip is to make that distinction between deterministic automation and dynamic sort of AI generation, generative AI automation, because I think we are significantly overcomplicating a lot of automation right now in this sort of late 2025 moment because generative AI is so exciting and so new and so shiny. And when you go down that generative AI path, you open up the potential for failures that were totally unnecessary
Right.
from your pre-existing process.
Which goes back to that idea that just because you have a hammer does not mean everything needs to be hammered. So just because AI exists does not mean you have to use it everywhere in your business because it may actually not be the right solution.
Right. And so really digging in on what is the problem you're trying to solve? No, really, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Looking through your constraints, your resources. And the third tip is to think about your long-term timeframes and your dependencies, right? Again, because there are so many new and fun tools that are coming out every day, these are often startups. These are often businesses with their own risk. And so being very conscious about when, where, how, and why you tie your operational longevity and stability to someone else's product, especially when it is a technology where there is currently a gap between the actual cost and the paid cost. I know there's a lot of conversation right now, right? How much water, how much power does every, pick on ChatGPT again, right? Query. I've seen some great comparisons for how many trees you could water every time you say please.
Yes.
The ChatGPT. And I think OpenAI is probably stable for the near midterm, but there are so many tools that do really neat things that are really fun to bring into your process. And just making sure that you're very consciously acknowledging when and where that is a cool experiment and where you are now becoming dependent on a business that's only been around for 3 months or a technology that might need to suddenly triple its price to stay in business. And can you afford that?
Mhm, mhm. Which goes back to the idea, I keep coming back to the same idea that just because something new exists does not mean that you need it. I recall pre-pandemic, I worked with an organization where we would meet with clients on conference calls. And so I was the consultant that they brought in. And so it'd be the person that hired me, the consultant, and the client all on these conference calls together, which is fine because I could do it wherever I was. Once the pandemic happened, all of a sudden they wanted to do all these calls on Zoom. And I'm like, why do I now have to be dressed from at least my torso up
Right.
and be in front of my computer? It's like, man, I was doing these calls from the car, from everywhere else. But just because they could do it on Zoom, now all of a sudden all these calls had to happen on Zoom, which made it more difficult to schedule. For me, inconvenient. I don't think it brought anything to the meeting. And it was just because here's this technology we want to use.
Yeah. Well, in that case too, especially coming in as a consultant, I think there can be real value in being that silent speakerphone on the table. People forget you're there. You get a lot more truth and trust, and because they forgot someone was listening in, and it's a lot harder on Zoom when you see that face attentively
Mhm, mhm.
speaking in.
Exactly. Very true. This was really helpful. Could you give us, as the action takers that our listeners are, can you give us one action that you would recommend that our listeners take?
To keep a log of the decisions you're making around automation and schedule yourself time every 3 months or so, not too often, to go back and look at what are you implementing and do you actually need all those automations? Are they serving you? And is it time to revisit them?
Oh, that's great. A lot of people have some sort of quarterly review in their business. So to just make this part of the quarterly review that many of you may already be doing would be really valuable. Thank you. I know that a lot of our listeners are going to want to stay in contact with you. How can they find you online?
So the easiest way to find me is bellewalker.com, Belle Walker.com. Also, I'm on LinkedIn, Belle K Walker, just for a little bit of variety, and would love to hear from all of you.
Well, Belle Walker, thank you so much for joining us here today. This was a great episode. You shared a lot of great content, and we appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me.